My name is Hannah Brooks. I'm 29 years old, and the worst pain in my body that night wasn't the fracture in my arm or the deep ache burning through my hip. It was hearing my father stand beside my hospital bed and say, "We'll handle this at home," as if my sister's violent attack was some embarrassing family misunderstanding instead of the reason I was lying under fluorescent lights with an IV in my hand and a brace cutting into my side. My mother kept smoothing the blanket over my legs every time a nurse walked in, acting like concern could erase what had happened on that concrete garage floor. My sister stayed in the hallway, crying at exactly the right volume for people to hear, rehearsing grief while my father repeated the same lie to anyone with a badge, a clipboard, or hospital scrubs. He said I slipped. He said I lost my balance. He said I'd always been clumsy under stress. But the emergency room doctor didn't look convinced. She studied my x-rays in total silence, then glanced at me, then back at the films again, like she was seeing two different stories fighting for space on the same screen. I still remember how the room changed after that. My mother stopped talking. My father's jaw tightened. Even I knew something had shifted before the doctor said a word. I didn't understand yet how one set of images could threaten everything my family had spent years protecting. I only knew that for the first time in my life, someone was looking at the evidence instead of listening to them. Before I tell you what that doctor saw on my x-rays, and who she called right after, tell me what time it is, where you are, and where you're watching from. I want to know how far the truth can travel when a family spends years trying to bury it. 2 days before I ended up in that ER, I was still trying to convince myself that what I'd found had to be a mistake. I lived alone in Raleigh, worked as an occupational therapy assistant in a private rehab clinic, paid my bills on time, kept my credit spotless, and lived the kind of steady, boring, drama-free life my family always described as safe, when they really meant forgettable. My older sister Caroline was the opposite. She was 33, polished, magnetic, and built for rooms that rewarded confidence before substance. She sold luxury homes in Cary, posted staged photos from open houses like they were scenes from a lifestyle magazine, and spoke with the kind of effortless charm that made strangers trust her within 5 minutes. In my parents' eyes, Caroline wasn't just successful. She was proof that our family image meant something. My mother, Melissa Brooks, treated every brunch, fundraiser, and holiday dinner like a branding opportunity. My father, David Brooks, was a CPA who liked order, tax law, church parking lot respectability, and the illusion that every mess could be made quiet if you handled it privately enough. Caroline fit into that world perfectly. I never did. I wasn't the glamorous one, or the social one, or the one with the ring light and the realtor smile. I was the dependable one, the one who answered calls, the one who drove over when our mother said she needed help setting up chairs, carrying boxes, dropping off prescriptions, reviewing paperwork, or calming down a crisis Caroline had created, and everyone else wanted cleaned up without mentioning her name. That Friday afternoon, my bank sent a fraud alert about a business line of credit application linked to my Social Security number. At first, I thought it was phishing. Then I saw the lender. Then I saw the business name. Then I saw my own information attached to a company address in Cary that I had never authorized, a lease guarantee I had never signed, and digital documents stamped with a version of my signature that looked close enough to pass in a hurry. I called the bank from the staff parking lot and sat in my car for almost 40 minutes, while the fraud specialist asked me questions I never thought I'd answer about my own family. Had anyone close to me ever had access to my tax documents? Had I shared old passwords? Had I ever allowed a relative to use my mailing address or identity information for temporary business paperwork? Every question felt less hypothetical than the last. By the end of the call, my stomach was in knots. The loan was tied to a boutique wellness studio called North Ash Collective, a business Caroline had publicly called a smart expansion of her brand 6 months earlier. I knew she was involved in it with 2 silent partners. I did not know it was bleeding money badly enough to borrow under my identity. I didn't call Caroline first. I drove straight to my parents' house in Cary because I already knew how this would go if I gave her time to script it. My mother opened the door in yoga clothes and perfume, one hand still holding her phone because she was organizing a Labor Day charity brunch for the next morning. She looked annoyed to see me unannounced, which told me everything before she even said a word. When I held up the printed application I had rushed to copy at a FedEx office on the way over, her face changed for half a second. Not surprise. Recognition. My father came in from his home office, saw the paper, and didn't ask what I was talking about. He asked where I got it. That was the moment I knew I wasn't walking into a misunderstanding. I was walking into a secret they had all already discussed without me. Caroline arrived 15 minutes later, still in a blazer from a showing, and the first thing she said was not, "I'm sorry." It was, "It's temporary, Hannah. Don't blow this up before Monday." I remember staring at her because I honestly thought I'd misheard. She said the studio had cash flow issues, one of the investors backed out, and a closing commission from a luxury listing would cover everything if I would just give her a few days. A few days, as if my identity had been borrowed like a serving tray. My father stepped in immediately, voice low and practical, telling me nobody had taken money directly from my personal account and that this could all be unwound quietly if I stayed calm. My mother added that family should solve family problems without making it legal. Caroline stood there looking irritated, not guilty, like I was being inconvenient about her emergency. I told them I had already flagged the account. I told them if there was one forged document, there were probably more. I told them I wanted access to every file, every email, every lender communication, and if I didn't get the truth, I was going to the police. Caroline's expression changed at the word police, not fear exactly. More like fury at the audacity of me saying it out loud. That was when I realized this wasn't the first line she thought she could cross. It was just the biggest one so far. Looking back, the fraud application should have shocked me more than it did. The truth is, part of me had been training for that moment for years. Caroline had never needed to hit me before she had already learned how to move around me, over me, and through me. Growing up, she figured out early that all she had to do was stay impressive enough, and our parents would rename anything ugly into something manageable. If she snapped at a server in a restaurant, she was exhausted. If she lied to a friend, she was under pressure. If she humiliated me in front of cousins, she was stressed, and I was too sensitive. I cannot tell you how many times I heard my mother say, "That's just how Caroline is," as if personality were a legal defense. After college, while I was finishing my certification and working double shifts in a rehab facility, Caroline floated between real estate teams, social circles, and big plans that always sounded one investor away from becoming an empire. My father helped her structure LLCs. My mother hosted launch parties. I was expected to clap. The first time I truly understood that Caroline could become dangerous was about 7 months before the garage incident, when she asked me to help her clear out a storage unit she was closing. She was late, frantic, and furious because one of her staging clients had fired her. I found unopened letters in a banker's box with red print along the top. Final notice. I also found 2 collection letters addressed to the studio. When I asked what was going on, she snatched the papers from my hand so hard my wrist twisted against the metal edge of a shelf. I cried out, and she immediately said, "Don't be dramatic." Later, in urgent care, the nurse asked how I'd injured it. Caroline was standing right there beside me, and before I could answer, she said, "Storage shelf slipped." I repeated it because I was tired, embarrassed, and still living under the stupid instinct that family humiliation was somehow worse than family harm. That wrist never fully stopped bothering me after that. So when she stood in our parents' kitchen acting offended that I didn't want a fraudulent loan in my name, something inside me finally lined up with all the pieces I had been refusing to put together. This wasn't a one-time lapse. This was escalation. I asked to see the studio's books. Caroline laughed. My father said absolutely not. My mother began talking about timing, appearances, Monday closings, legal exposure, reputational damage, and the kind of scandal that ruins people permanently. What she never talked about was what had already been ruined for me: my credit, my trust, my right to decide what happened with my own name. I remember telling them I didn't care if Caroline lost a listing, and my mother's eyes widened like I had confessed to arson. In that family, the possibility of public embarrassment was treated like a greater threat than private betrayal. I left that night with copies of what I could get and sent photos of every document to Nicole Alvarez, a paralegal I had known since community college. Nicole lived in Durham, had zero patience for family spin, and was the kind of friend who read screenshots like crime scene evidence. I texted her, "Tell me if I'm overreacting." She called me in under 3 minutes and said, "You're underreacting. Freeze everything." She helped me make a list: credit freeze, fraud affidavit, bank escalation, lender complaint, police report, certified mail to the business address, and a complete password reset on every account I had. The more I followed the trail, the uglier it got. Carolyn had used an old scanned copy of my driver's license from a family beach trip booking years earlier. She had used payroll information from a tax file my father once insisted on reviewing to help me optimize deductions. She had used a digital signature template so close to mine, it made me nauseous. By Saturday morning, I had enough to destroy her weekend and probably her career. By Saturday afternoon, my mother was calling every 2 hours, asking me to come over Sunday morning before the brunch so we could speak as adults. I said I would come after church traffic died down, and only because I wanted one last chance to look all 3 of them in the eye before I made anything official. When I got there Sunday, the house was already in performance mode. White flowers on the counter, catering trays in the garage fridge, folded napkins lined up like tiny surrender flags. My mother tried to pull me into a hug in the hallway. I stepped back. My father asked if I had cooled off. Caroline was upstairs getting ready for an open house after the brunch, which somehow made the whole thing feel even more obscene. They had built an entire day around pretending normal life could continue on schedule if I would just agree to stay useful and quiet. I told them I had spent the morning freezing my credit and documenting everything. I told them I was giving Caroline until that evening to send me every lender email, every account tied to my information, and a signed statement acknowledging the fraud. My father called that extreme. My mother called it cruel. Then Caroline came downstairs in a cream blouse, earrings on, makeup done, and said, "You always do this, Hannah. You always wait until I have something important going on, and then make yourself the victim." I think that sentence changed something permanent in me. There was no apology behind her, no panic, no shame, just the same old family logic with nicer shoes on. If she needed something, I owed her silence. If I objected, I was the problem. I told her I was done protecting her from consequences she kept handing me. She stared at me for a long second, then said, "Fine. Come into the garage. We'll talk without Mom spiraling." I should have said no. I know that now. But at the time, I still believed talking privately might expose the last bit of honesty left in her. Instead, it exposed something else. The garage smelled like cardboard, bleach, and the artificial vanilla scent my mother sprayed before guests came over. Folding chairs were stacked near the wall. A metal shelving unit held flower buckets, boxed decor, and catering supplies for the brunch. Caroline closed the side door behind us and crossed her arms like we were about to negotiate a contract. Her voice dropped immediately. No more tears, no more family language, no more performance. She told me the studio's landlord had threatened legal action. One partner wanted out, and if I filed a police report before Monday, lenders would freeze the business and she would lose not only the closing but probably her real estate license. I said that sounded like the natural consequence of fraud. She stepped closer and told me I had no idea how hard she'd worked for what she had. That was almost funny coming from someone standing in a garage full of catered pastries paid for by our parents, while her debt sat under my name. I told her I had already prepared a complaint packet, and all I needed to do Monday morning was hit send. That was when her breathing changed. I saw it before I fully registered it, the way her jaw locked and one hand twitched toward my phone in my right hand. She asked who else knew. I said Nicole had copies. I said the bank had copies. I said she was out of time. Caroline moved fast after that. She lunged for the phone and I pulled back instinctively, my shoulder hitting the side of the shelving unit. She grabbed my forearm and hissed, "You are not ruining my life over paperwork." I shoved her off me and said, "You used my identity." She came at me again. It wasn't some drawn-out fight. It was 10 chaotic seconds that changed everything. Her hand hit my wrist. I lost balance. She shoved harder than she meant to, or maybe exactly as hard as she meant to. I've thought about that 1,000 times, and my left side slammed into the metal shelf. Buckets toppled. Boxes burst open. My hip hit the concrete first, then my arm, then the back of my head glanced off the floor hard enough to send sparks through my vision. I couldn't breathe right away. I remember gasping and hearing the horrible scrape of something metal still rattling above me. Caroline froze. The phone skidded under a folding table. My mother's heels clicked fast across the kitchen tile before she reached the door. My father was right behind her. He saw me on the ground, saw Caroline standing over me, and I swear to you his face registered the truth before any of us said a word. But truth was never the thing he protected first. He knelt beside me, checked my pupils, touched my ribs, and when I cried out trying to move my arm, he muttered a curse under his breath. My mother asked what happened 3 times in a row, but not because she wanted an answer. She wanted the best version of one. Caroline started crying immediately. "She slipped," she said. "She slipped when she pulled away." My father snapped at her to stop talking, then turned to me and said the sentence I will hear for the rest of my life. "No one says anything stupid. We'll handle this at home." I looked at him from the floor and realized he wasn't saying it out of confusion. He was making a decision. I told him my arm felt wrong. He said we'd get it looked at, but we were not turning this into a spectacle. My mother was already thinking ahead, asking what they would tell the brunch guests, what to do with the food, whether we could still make it seem like a normal morning. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just lay there shaking while Caroline cried above me and my father reached for his phone. He didn't call 911 first. He called someone he knew at the hospital. By the time they finally got me into the SUV, I was pale, sweating, and biting my lip hard enough to taste blood. Caroline wasn't allowed in the car. My mother rode in the back with me, dabbing my face and whispering that we were going to get this under control, that families survived worse things, that one terrible moment didn't need to become a permanent disaster. My father drove too fast and too calmly, which somehow felt worse than panic. Halfway to the ER, he said, without looking at me, "You tell them you fell against the shelving unit after losing your footing." I asked him what he would do if I said no. He kept his eyes on the road and said, "Then you destroy your sister, your mother, and this whole family in a single afternoon." It was one of the cruelest things anyone had ever said to me, because he made it sound like protecting myself would be an act of aggression. At the emergency entrance, a nurse came out with a wheelchair, and my father transformed instantly into a worried parent. He gave them the carefully edited version before I was even through triage. I had a fall, garage accident, arm pain, possible rib injury, no loss of consciousness, patient anxious. Sister witnessed it, mother distraught. I sat there listening to my own life get rewritten in real time while pain rolled through my side every time I took a breath. If you've never been in an emergency room while the people who hurt you are still deciding which lie to tell, I hope you never understand how surreal it feels. Everything around you is mechanical, urgent, clinical, and yet the most important thing in the room is the story that gets attached to your chart. A nurse cut my sleeve. Another asked me to rate the pain. A tech wheeled me down for imaging. Through all of it, my parents hovered close enough to answer before I could. My mother kept saying garage accident like repetition alone could make it medically useful. My father's voice had that polished professional steadiness he used with clients and church elders, the tone that made people assume competence and honesty belonged together. When a resident asked if I hit anything else on the way down, he answered, "Shelf edge, then concrete," before I could speak. I think part of me still believed I'd find the courage at the next question or the one after that. But years of being managed by them had built a kind of paralysis in me. You start to doubt not what happened, but whether you're allowed to insist on it. The first person who truly unsettled my father that night was the ER attending, Dr. Lena Ortiz. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't warm in a performative way. She was precise. That frightened him more. She introduced herself, asked me where it hurt most, and actually waited for me to answer. Then she ordered additional imaging after the initial X-rays. My father tried to say he had a colleague in orthopedics who could review things later. She said, "I'm reviewing them now." "Yes." My mother tried to stay in the room during everything, but Dr. Ortiz asked her to step out while they repositioned me for repeat views. I remember lying there under bright light, trying not to cry while the tech adjusted my arm, and Dr. Ortiz looking at the screen with a stillness that felt different from everyone else. She asked if I had ever injured that wrist before. I said yes. Months ago. Storage accident. She nodded but didn't look convinced. Later, back in the curtained room, I heard her ask for prior records. That's when my father's posture changed. Just slightly, but I saw it. He had assumed tonight would be simple. X-ray, brace, pain meds, discharge, silence. Instead, a doctor he didn't control had started pulling on a thread. When the preliminary results came back, they showed a distal radius fracture in my left arm, a deep bone bruise near my hip, and trauma consistent with a side impact fall. I'm not a physician, but I work around rehab medicine long enough to understand the basics. Dr. Ortiz explained it plainly. What she didn't say at first was what she was thinking. She asked again how it happened. My mother answered from the corner. She twisted away from the shelf and lost her footing. "Doctor." Ortiz turned to me, not her. "Hannah?" My throat tightened. I heard my father shift his chair. I looked down and said, "I fell in the garage." It wasn't a full lie. That almost made it worse. Dr. Ortiz held my gaze for 1 second too long, then stepped out with the chart. A hospital social worker came in not long after. Her name was Keisha Bell. She had a clipped badge, soft sneakers, and the calm tone of someone who had heard too many rehearsed family stories to trust the first one. She said it was routine because of the nature of my injuries. My father immediately objected that there was no need. She replied that routine meant routine. My mother began tearing up again, telling Ms. Bell that our family was under stress, and Caroline felt horrible, and everyone was just trying to get through a difficult day. Ms. Bell let her speak, then asked if I wanted to answer any questions privately. I hesitated long enough for my father to say I was medicated and exhausted. Ms. Bell did not argue. She simply placed her card on the tray table near my water cup and said, If anything about your injury or your home situation feels unsafe, tell your nurse you want me back." Then she left. Nicole called while my parents were in the hallway arguing with registration about insurance. I answered because for once no one was standing over me. I could barely speak above a whisper, but she heard enough. "Did she touch you?" she asked. I said yes. "Did your parents see it?" I said they saw me on the floor. Nicole was silent for one beat, then said, "Do not let them discharge you before you speak to someone alone. I mean it." She told me she had already started printing public business filings on the studio and had found my name nowhere legitimate, which meant if it was on lender paperwork, it had been inserted off record. She also found an investor complaint in a county filing connected to Caroline's business partner. "This is bigger than a family argument," she said. "This is pattern behavior." I closed my eyes because pattern was exactly the word I had been avoiding. If this was a pattern, then I had not just been injured. I had been managed into silence repeatedly until the violence finally caught up with the paperwork. When Dr. Ortiz came back the second time, she brought a laptop, my chart, and my older urgent care notes from the storage unit visit. She asked my parents to wait outside. My father refused. She said, "I'm not asking." Something in her voice made even him pause. My mother rose slowly, pulling him with her. The curtains settled. The room got quiet in a way that felt dangerous and relieving at the same time. Dr. Ortiz turned the screen toward me and pointed to the older wrist imaging, then the fresh films. "I need to ask you a direct question," she said. "Did someone push you today?" My whole body went cold. Not because I was surprised by the question, because it was the first time anyone had said the exact truth out loud. "I wish I could tell you," I answered immediately. "I wish I could tell you that the second Dr. Ortiz gave me permission to tell the truth. It came pouring out of me in one brave, perfect speech. It didn't. First I cried. Then I said I didn't know. Then I tried to explain the garage in fragments that still sounded like excuses, because that was the language I had been taught. Not what happened, but why it was complicated. Dr. Ortiz didn't rush me. She just waited. She told me she was not asking whether my sister meant well or whether my parents loved me or whether the day had been stressful. She was asking about force, intent, safety. The simplicity of that question cracked something open. I told her Caroline used my social security number for a business loan. I told her I came to the house to confront her. I told her she dragged at my arm trying to grab my phone and shoved me into the shelving unit hard enough to knock me down. I told her my father saw me on the floor and decided almost immediately that protecting my sister mattered more than reporting the truth. I told her about the storage unit wrist injury months earlier. I told her about how quickly everyone in my family learned to rename whatever Caroline did. By the time I finished, Dr. Ortiz's expression hadn't become emotional, which I appreciated more than sympathy. It had become certain. She explained that my current injuries and the old wrist record raised enough concern for assault and coercion that she was required to act. She brought Ms. Bell back in. She documented my statement. She asked whether I felt safe going home. I said no before fear could talk me out of it. That one word may have been the most important thing I said all year. Ms. Bell asked if there was someone outside my immediate family I trusted. I said, Nicole. While they were arranging what would happen next, my father tried to come back in and was stopped by a nurse. He pushed harder when he realized the door was no longer opening on command. I could hear his voice outside, controlled but rising, asking what exactly was going on, why hospital staff were escalating a simple domestic accident, whether they understood the legal consequences of making assumptions. Ms. Bell didn't even glance at the door. "That reaction is useful information," she said quietly. The county sheriff's deputies arrived less than 30 minutes later. When they arrived, the entire lie my parents had been balancing started to collapse under its own weight. My mother began crying harder, not from heartbreak, but from exposure. My father switched immediately into strategic language, asking for names, asking under what authority they were questioning his family, asking whether a report had already been filed. Caroline, who had finally come into the hospital after changing into a softer outfit and bringing her fiancé for moral cover, looked like she couldn't decide whether to cry, apologize, or blame me. One of the deputies spoke with me privately first. Another stayed near the hallway because my father had already become combative enough to concern security. I told the deputy everything I had told Dr. Ortiz, plus the identity fraud, the forged signatures, the business documents, the bank alert, and Nicole's copies. The moment I said there were documents and a financial trail, the deputy's entire posture sharpened. This was no longer just a family dispute with an injury attached. This was assault tied to fraud, intimidation, and attempted cover-up. They asked if I had my phone. I said it had slid under the garage table, but Nicole had screenshots of the loan application and I had already emailed copies to myself. Ms. Bell helped me access my account from the hospital iPad because my phone was still at my parents' house. My father demanded to sit in on Caroline's interview. The deputies told him no. My mother tried the softer version of manipulation, telling them our family was going through a stress-related misunderstanding, and Hannah had been anxious for months because of work. Caroline initially repeated the accident story almost word for word, but she didn't know Dr. Ortiz had already documented that the injury pattern didn't line up cleanly with a simple slip. She also didn't know one of the deputies had asked a question she wasn't expecting. Why had she texted our mother 20 minutes before we left for the hospital? I didn't mean for her to hit that hard. Caroline had sent it. My mother had not deleted it quickly enough. It showed up when the deputy asked to see recent communications relevant to the incident, and my mother, in her panic, tried too hard to explain it away. That was the first visible crack in Caroline. Her fiancé, Ethan, heard enough from the hallway to realize the story he'd been given was fiction. He didn't yell. He didn't defend her. He just stepped back like the room had become dangerous. The deputies took a formal report. Ms. Bell arranged for me not to be discharged into my parents' care. Nicole drove to the hospital from Durham that same night and arrived still wearing the black flats she worked in, carrying chargers, clothes, and a folder already thick with printed records. When she walked in, I nearly cried again from relief. She wasn't family, which meant her concern didn't come with conditions. She gave the deputies everything: screenshots, timestamps, business registration searches, the lender confirmation, and a chronology we had started building from the moment I found the fraud alert. My father watched all of this from the doorway, like a man seeing a private problem become public property. He kept trying to catch my eye, maybe to remind me who I had always been in that family. The fixer, the smoother-over, the one who could still save them if I backed down. But something about the hospital changed that dynamic forever. Under those lights, with my arm braced and my chart full of facts instead of family opinion, I stopped feeling like the person with too much emotion and started feeling like the person with the actual evidence. Before they moved me to a quieter room for overnight observation, Dr. Ortiz came back one last time. She said, very simply, "Your x-rays spoke louder than the story they brought in here." I have never forgotten that sentence because it was bigger than medicine. My whole life, my family had trained me to think their version of events was sturdier than my memory. But bones don't care about social standing. Impact doesn't care about who hosts the charity brunch. A fracture doesn't adjust itself to protect a golden child. The evidence was what it was. And for the first time, that mattered more than the family script. Out in the waiting room, one deputy was telling my parents they needed to remain available for further questioning. Caroline was crying now for real, which was the cruelest kind of irony. She had finally lost control of the narrative, and that was the one consequence she never thought would reach her. The aftermath didn't come all at once, but it came hard enough to change every life in my family. Investigators pulled the loan records, matched the forged documents to Caroline's business accounts, and confirmed that my identity had been used to keep her failing studio alive. The assault charge and the fraud charges moved together, and once that happened, the version of Caroline my parents had protected for years started collapsing in public. Her real estate license was suspended. The luxury closing she had been desperate to save fell apart, and her fiancé ended the engagement when he realized the truth was far worse than a family argument gone wrong. My mother lost the social standing she had valued more than honesty, and my father's reputation took a hit he couldn't quietly explain away. For the first time, their image couldn't outrun the damage they had helped create. I didn't go back home. With help from the hospital social worker and my friend Nicole, I moved somewhere safe, froze every account connected to my name, and started rebuilding the practical parts of my life one step at a time. Therapy helped me understand something I had avoided for years. Caroline's violence didn't begin in that garage. It began in a family where she was protected from consequences so often that she eventually believed she was untouchable. The X-rays didn't just prove I was hurt. They proved I had not imagined the pattern. Caroline sent 2 apologies, both too late and both centered more on what she had lost than what she had done. I never answered. My parents tried to talk about healing, but neither of them could say the one thing that mattered most: that they chose silence over my safety. So I stopped carrying the burden of making them comfortable. I returned to work slowly, finished my recovery, and began volunteering with a nonprofit that helps women facing financial abuse and family coercion. Turning my experience into something useful didn't erase what happened, but it gave it a direction. If there's one lesson in all of this, it's that keeping quiet does not keep the peace. It only protects the people causing the harm. The night my father said, "We'll handle this at home," he was really asking me to disappear one more time for the sake of the family image. But the X-rays spoke louder. The truth spoke louder. And in the end, that truth saved me more than my family ever did.
We truly appreciate your time and continued support. Our situation as this video are fictional and made only for storytelling and educational entertainment. We hope it reminds you that when people benefit from your silence, they may call your boundaries selfish, but that does not mean your boundaries are wrong.